Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming and talk about My Hero Academia season 5, episode 7. There we go. Hey everyone. So, another week of Hero Academia, this time focusing on Ida, Todoroki, Tetsu, Juzo, Ojiro, Goji, Pony, and that one guy with the spinny bits. Yeah, it's another episode of Hero Academia. For those who don't know, just to make it clear, whenever I put up an arbitrary score on the thumbnail, I do have a nice little description of why exactly I put in the score, because sometimes I'm not very clear in the videos. It's a lot faster if you just want to read why I give it an arbitrary score. But for this week of Hero Academia, relative to Hero Academia itself as a series, I feel like this episode was alright. You know, it didn't do anything offensively wrong. It didn't do anything compared to the relative standard of Hero Academia. It didn't do anything horrific. So for this week, I do feel pretty confident just giving it an 8 out of 10 in terms of what the episode is. Mind you, we are in a slice of life, well, not slice of life arc, we're in a school arc, so naturally the excitement is lower. But to berate Hero Academia for going into a school arc, that's a wider criticism. This is essentially a setup arc for the future, so that my score takes that into account. We're looking at it relative to the rest of the arc and also relative to the little details and logical issues that it might have or something like that. Anyway, if we were to talk about the flaws for the episode, it'd be a little bit of a nitpick issue. The episode does some interesting things. We get to see the quirks. We have some interesting themes being established. We have some character themes, I guess you could say, and there is on an analysis level, there is something interesting, specifically when it comes to the techniques used to make a character stand out. So very quickly to go into what I think would be the weaknesses for the episode. Well, it is locked into silly dialogue. That's pretty much it. In this episode, we do have a few scenes that are expanded material. The scene with Endeavor, that doesn't happen in the manga, not entirely. In the manga, Endeavor had his Shoto thing with the phone in his office, whereas here we saw Endeavor dealing with a villain. The villain thing doesn't happen in the manga, and in terms of the expanded material, that was actually appreciated. That one isn't weak. However, the Mineta scene where Mina gets sent into the sky, I believe that is expanded. It wasn't in the manga when I checked real quick. And that one is where it kind of shows the weaknesses of having filler material, because Mineta says something nonsensical like, you're gonna waste your quirk, and it's like, that's not how Ochako's quirk works. There's not like some kind of SP constraint. Like, Ochako uses her hand and now she has like 195 out of 200 SP left. That's not how hers works. Hers is an upper limit on how much she can have up in the air at one time. So it's just nonsensical things like that. Filler material tends to be a spot where things get kind of stupid, because you shouldn't really be expecting the anime to be keeping that much attention on the show that they're adapting. And this is really where the criticisms lie. It's really in just nonsensical dialogue. There is another spot that I think is very nonsensical, and it's specifically, this one is in the manga as well. It's specifically, Hero Academia is at its worst when it's trying to hype up characters. Because the thing, especially for this arc, now I'm looking at it again and I'm really realizing like how much this was probably like a big issue in general. There is one scene where Ojiro is trying to hype up Juzo, right? And he goes and he says, oh my gosh, he reacted to the ice and was able to soften it, or something like that. Wait, let me get you the exact line, because this was pretty funny. Okay, so I found it. It's Ojiro. After Juzo softens everything, Ojiro goes like, he activated it before the ice froze him in place. He reacts super fast. Now, like, I'm sure that there is something else I'm sure that this is, the author was trying to convey an idea, but this is a little bit silly. Because what they're ultimately trying to say is like, oh my god, Juzo is super tough, but it's like, look at the nature of his quirk. And also look at where he was standing when everything went down. And he activated it before the ice froze him in place. What does that even mean, before the ice froze him in place? I saw that whole situation. Spinny guy was able to still move his hand. think about it. If it's a quirk that activates on touch, does it matter if Juzo got frozen? With the way that, the issue here is the way that the guy is saying it. Does it matter that he got frozen in place if he can move his hand and place it on the ice? Clearly, being frozen doesn't matter, because even though these guys were standing in what was essentially below 0 degrees Celsius, even though they were standing in a puddle of what should have been ice cold water, these guys weren't frozen. They were able to still get out of here. This whole idea about him activating it before the ice froze him in place, what does that mean in practice? And what is the difference between activating it after the ice has, for instance, caught the lower body? The other thing is that he's not in the ice at any given point here. And from what we see in the quirk is activating from a large distance away because we see him on top of a pipe. Yeah, no, this is a very nonsensical line, because reaction time doesn't matter here in any which way. If these people can still move being in the ice, he can activate his quirk whenever he wants. All he has to do is touch the ice. You know, this is just, I think, an issue of just the awkwardness of translating an idea into real time. At the end of the day, what the line is there to do is to say, oh, Juzo is pretty fast, right? He thinks fast. That's what it's there to say. That's all it is. It's just the example used is not in any which way a good example. Probably could have spent more time trying to... Actually, you could have just skipped it altogether. Like when you see Juzo here, there's not really anything that really speaks to reaction speed here, because the thing here is that you don't really know the speed at which his quirk propagates. For instance, if he touches the ground, how long will it take for his quirk to affect the ground that's say 20 feet away from him, right? We don't know that. We don't know that in any which way, and it looks like he managed to puddle up the majority of the ice that was in the area naturally. So, you know, not the best little showing there, but that's pretty much where I would say the weaknesses for the episode are. I think it's just weaknesses that come when you're trying to hype up the character. It's just, again, nonsensical. And again, this might also just be an awkwardness of the exact wording of translation, and then the troubles that come with animating something 2D into a moving project or something like that. That's why I wouldn't take away too many points for it. Now, in terms of a discussion thing, there is actually a really cool discussion thing that is I find pretty exciting, and that is specifically the way in which the writing tries to distinguish characters, because it's just so interesting. So first thing I want to start with is what is a meta element. At the beginning of the episode, we have Izuku giving a quick recap. And the recap is interesting for one thing. In the recap, Izuku summarizes what was going on with Kendo and Momo. Oh, and Momo had an expanded scene in this one, like the scene where you see Momo with her lip. Oh, sorry, with Recovery Girl's lipstick on her. That's anime only. It was just a funny scene. But going back to Momo, Izuku described Kendo and Momo's thing as Kendo's plan coming into conflict with Momo's situational analysis. When I saw that, I felt so validated, because it's interesting. Situational analysis. No one in the previous episode referred to what Momo was doing. Only in the recap do you have Izuku actually saying that what Momo was using to fight Kendo's forward-thinking plan, as in something that Kendo thought of ahead of time, was incredible adaptability, the situational analysis. And this is from my translation, right? So, like, you know, might be a little bit wrong here, but it's just interesting. It's interesting because this is the only place that we see it. Last episode was called Foresight. And now this is going to walk into, like, this conversation, because look at the way that the propaganda is positioned in this episode. In this episode, how often was Juzo called flexible, right? Oh, you're so flexible. You're flexible everywhere. You're flexible about everything. That is his big trait. Arguably, Momo last episode didn't show really good foresight. Kendo showed really good foresight. In this episode, but in last episode, Momo shows that she was really flexible. That's the big thing. Momo was in reaction the majority of the time with Kendo, having to come up with ideas while also reacting to Kendo's plan in real time. When you come into Juzo, is it really that he's just flexible? There was only one character in this episode that pointed out that Juzo was thinking ahead, but when you see Juzo actually saying, like, hey, yeah, You know, first off, he correctly identifies that Todoroki is going to be a pretty critical person in this. He correctly identifies Ida as a threat. Like, he does a lot of correct identifications, so much like Kendo did with the appraising the quirks of the other side. Juzo's able to do it here too. But then you have him pointing out, yeah, no, I went and I activated softening on a bunch of other places here to trap you. If that is not foresight, I don't know what is. And that is the big thing here. Juzo ultimately is doing the same things that Momo wishes she did and that Kendo did. Not only is he flexible, and in that case able to adapt to any situation, or able to adapt to a changing situation, much like Momo did in the previous episode, he's also thinking ahead, and he's also like doing things relatively quickly. Especially with Juzo, he should be comparable to Momo because they do come in on a comparison point, that being both of them are the recommendation students, along with Shoto and one other person. What you ultimately take away from this is just, these are characters being described with different words, but ultimately doing the same thing. And at that point, you have to like ask, well, you know, what's the value of this? Well, see, by having Juzo reinforced as the flexible one, you do have that's essentially a gimmick. And when you have so many characters, for some, the gimmicks or their predominant character traits are something that help people remember them a little bit easier. One Piece does this to great effect. They have a lot of characters introduced with gimmicks. Like, you know, a lot of times in One Piece, you may not remember the name of a character, but you might remember their over-exaggerated quality. In this case, the over-exaggerated quality is Juzo's flexibility. But at the end of the day, when you look at the situations in practice, Juzo's capabilities are not different from Momo's capabilities in terms of their intellect. But the differences always come in how the author presents it. It's just very interesting, right? Because the ultimate thing is, you know, you have Momo, despite losing, being rewarded for thinking ahead or forward thinking. And then no one except Sugarman is pointing out that Juzo did the same thing to great effect. And that's where the unfairness comes in when you're trying to distinguish characters that overall have the same capabilities. Is it a negative point or a positive point? No, it's not really either. If anything, it's interesting to see the way in which the author goes into distinguishing the characters. It's just an interesting technique to observe. If there was something to negative that could be inferred from this, is just there is a limit to how smart the author can make characters look. Like, his tricks here are pretty much limited to quirk appreciation and thinking ahead of time. Like, there is nothing else here that is really sophisticated. It would be a little bit different if you had characters taking advantage of actual laws of physics. For instance, like in Air Gear, there was a really cool moment where Shaman King did this as well, where a character fought against electricity powers by using too much fire, I believe, because fire and heat, after a certain point, if I recall, are able to decompose magnetic fields or something like that. I don't remember the exact rules for it because even that was new when I first read about it. But that's where you would go if you want to make characters seem like really smart. You do what anime and manga always do, and you reference science and then make it work. Actually, let me just very quickly check. Oh, okay. I think I got the name wrong, but I did find like articles like the effect of magnetism on the effect of heat on a magnet. For instance, if it goes higher than a certain temperature, the magnet will lose its magnetism. So it's things like that, right? If you had people actually referencing science a little bit more, that's how you would make a more intelligent character. But otherwise, the author is largely stuck on generally tactics-based intelligence, and when it comes to tactics-based intelligence, like, it's not, he's in a bit of a limited field. In terms of the other things the episode did were really nice. So it was really cool to see Bakugo talking to Izuku and All Might and telling them like, hey, don't be so stupid, guys. And it's always nice to see Bakugo's way of caring about Izuku. But I really do enjoy this idea that Tokoyami brings up, that he and Shoto have a responsibility to uphold the honor of Hawks and Endeavor. This is Tokoyami. This is actually setting up his character. He does care about Hawks. He does idolize Hawks. And he does want, he's building up this importance for himself, and it's pretty cool. Of course, Tokoyami says this without being aware of the situation with Shoto, but that's fine because him and Shoto aren't really friends. Well, they're not really close friends, right? And then you have Ida overhearing this and him bringing up his own aspect or his own angle to this. So when you see the episode, like the theme of the thing really is about living up to the legacies of greater heroes. In this case, it's Ida and Ingenium. Well, Ida and Tensei, and then you have Shoto and Endeavor, as complicated as that is. But it is a pretty cool theme to be working with, and it does give us something because ultimately these are things that can kind of push the character along. Like every step that Ida takes forward is every step he gets closer to his brother's ideal, and every step that Shoto takes forward is every step forward he takes into having a healthy relationship with his powers. Because as you see in this episode, Juzo does point out, like, hey, if you used your fire side, or if you used fire, this would have been really hard, but you went with ice instead, which is really important. Also, in terms of development, we also had Ochako pointing out that this time Shoto did not block his view using his ice, which I'm very curious how she saw that over the screen. But it's good to know that Shoto did not block his view. That's something he's learned from the Stain days. So overall, when it comes to the theme that's being implemented here, you have characters progressing through. In this case, you have characters who are progressing towards the goal that another hero sets for them. Or, yeah, I don't want that. I gotta be careful with that. Another goal that the heroes ahead of them represent for them. I think that'd be the safer way of saying that. And that is valuable because if you didn't have this theme going in here, you might not have these kids moving to. You might not have the growth element, and especially for low stakes arcs like this, you need to maintain some kind of growth element if you want to maintain some kind of sense of progression. So on a technical level, it's a really smart move to include that theme here, and having Tokoyami be the one to bring it up is also a very smart move because Tokoyami doesn't really get that many lines outside of fights. So overall, there are smart choices here. If there was something that has to be criticized, it's specifically the hype up, because when the hype up starts, it gets a little bit nonsensical, but otherwise, overall enjoyable episode. One thing I do want to impart with you guys is that for this arc, people have the complaints that you had during the manga era were the same complaints that the anime onlys are having now, that, you know, it feels like it's lesser compared to everything else. But this ultimately is an important arc where what this arc represents is the ability for the kids to grow in a safe environment. And for kids who are in high school, being able to grow without the penalty of death is relatively valuable, because this is one of the only places where they can fail and safely fail. And this is something I touched on in the previous episode. So let's keep that in mind. But overall, I think solid episode. Let me know what you thought down below, and till next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.